Shalom. I'm Rabbi Josh Caruso of Anshe Chesed Fairmount Temple, and it is truly my honor to be here today to stand with Chuck's family in loving memory. It's not a place where we'd like to be right now, for sure, but it's a place where we can honor him and pay him great tribute today. And I know I speak on behalf of the family in thanking you all for being here and for supporting them, as Chuck has supported so many of us in his lifetime. In the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing, a time for wailing, a time for birthing, a time for dying, a time for speaking, a time for silence, a time for seeking, time for losing. The time of mourning is a complicated time. It's filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. We begin our service with the recitation of psalms and prayers, thus linking Chuck's life with the 3,000-year-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God. I invite you to join me, if you wish, for the recitation of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Just 3 days after Yom Kippur, the Jewish festival of Sukkot began. And isn't that how the world turns? When one light descends, another light is born. The rhythms of the Jewish year bring us through the days of awe, Rosh Hashanah, through Yom Kippur, and we pray. We pray that we are once again written and inscribed for at least one more year into the book of life. Immediately following Yom Kippur, the Jewish calendar plunges us into the festival of Sukkot, the festival of booths. On Sukkot, we sit in the temporariness of a dwelling, resembling the capriciousness of life, the fragility of life. A sukkah is constructed in such a way to remind us that each day is a blessing, and we don't know what's going to come next. It reminds us that some days it's going to rain. Some days the sun is going to be too bright. Some days we're going to have to grind through. And it reminds us also of God's incredible presence, that we dwell underneath this Sukkat Shalom, this booth of peace. It reminds us that there is more to life, that after Yom Kippur is completed, we can step outside and we can enjoy life. We can also soak up the sun, and we can even dance in the rain. Sukkot is also known as Man Simchatenu, the season of our joy. It is a mitzvah to say blessings while underneath the sukkah, a way to show that we know we are guided by God's steadfast presence. And today we are assembling under Chucky's figurative sukkah, his shelter of love and guidance. We assemble to share blessings and memories that remind us who he was to his family, his friends, and to the greater community. Today, we honor a man who is generous of heart, of spirit, of candy, of which he dispensed copious amounts to his loving grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He took for himself too. You'll hear more about that. Chucky was the boss, long before Bruce Springsteen ever earned that moniker. He was a leader in countless ways, and he was a leader of his family, many of whom are here today, so many, who honor him with their presence because he honored them by being a steadfast support in their lives. Today they give back, and they remember him for blessing. We're going to hear from Chucky's son Dale and from his grandson Todd to share some memories on behalf of themselves and their greater families. Dale.
This is obviously a sad occasion for me, but at the same time, I feel honored to be able to deliver a eulogy for my 95-year-old father who lived such an exemplary life. As funny as it sounds, I always had a hard time wrapping my mind around my father's death. Even in the last days I spent with him and watched life slipping from his body, I couldn't imagine a world without him in it. He was a man so full of life and positivity, and he was a huge part of my life. My father wasn't a religious or observant man, yet he was a tzaddik. He was a righteous man. And although he wasn't religious or observant, he lived a very spiritual life from the standpoint that his philosophy of living was all about love. He loved life. He loved his friends. He loved his family. He was a kind, decent, warm, funny, and loving man. He didn't dwell in the negative. He always saw the positive side of life. He was a generous man. He loved to help people, and he helped many people whenever and however he could. Whether it was advice or material things, he couldn't say no to anyone. And he never asked for anything in return. My father was a wonderful athlete. He played sports at a high level. He hated losing. He was a fierce competitor. I'll always remember his kindness and love. He played sports until he was into his 40s. Baseball. He played basketball with his friends at Glenville High School into his 30s. And what little boy wouldn't want to go with his father to play baseball or watch him play basketball? I never had to ask my father. It was automatic. He took me everywhere. I could tell story after story about my father's good nature and generous way towards me and others. But the most impressive thing about him was his love for his friends and his family. My father didn't have a lot of formal education, but he was a very wise man. He was compassionate and forgiving. He understood the human condition. You didn't have to explain anything to him. You didn't have to apologize. He accepted and looked forward. And he told you to do the same thing. He had a way of making you feel it will all work out in the end. In closing, he was my hero. And I think there are a few people in these rooms who also considered him to be their hero. He was my best friend, and I will miss him.
Gene made a machine. Joe cranked the crank. Art blew a fart and blew it all apart. On August 16th, 2003, we had a party for Pop in Cleveland to celebrate his 80th birthday, and I gave a toast. On October 25th, his actual birthday in 2008, we had a party for Pop in Miami to celebrate his 85th birthday, and I gave an updated version of this speech. On July 21st, 2013, there was a party for Pop's 90th birthday, and I gave another updated version of the toast. There are too many important people to name who heard this speech 15, 10, and 5 years ago who are not here with us today, but I'm glad they got to hear it. I would have been doing a new version of the toast about 2 weeks from now when we were to celebrate Pop's 95th birthday, and had hoped to be doing it again in 2023 for 100. The backstory. In 2000, Pop called me after he had attended the funeral of a friend, and he told me how this man's granddaughter gave the best eulogy he'd ever heard. Then he told me that he wanted me to give the eulogy at his funeral, but that he wanted to hear it first. So although he probably didn't hear it very well, 5, 10, or even 15 years ago, he got to hear it. It started, "I'm thrilled that we're celebrating your birthday rather than attending your funeral. And I hope that I'm not speaking in front of this group or any other group again until your next big birthday. I won't deliver a eulogy, but I will share my opening words. Picture this. You've been through the family room at Berkowitz-Kumin and given your hugs. You've taken your seat and said hello to everyone you know in the packed chapel. The rabbi has made opening remarks, said a few prayers, and now I'm at the podium. I look out at you and say, Gene made a machine. Joe cranked the crank. Art blew a fart and blew it all apart." For those of you who have never heard this before, it is the triumphant yet tragic tale of an entrepreneur and his coworkers. Pop told me the story many times when I was a little kid. It's a story that still inspires me today. By the way, whenever Pop would let one go, he'd say to me, as if it just slipped out, "Oh, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold." But his penchant for passing gas isn't the only thing about Pop that we need to discuss. Although I think he'd appreciate it that I brought it up today. Beside how white his hair had gotten and how skinny he was, Pop still looked pretty much the same as he did my entire life. His nose was still big, his mustache was still small, and his teeth spent more time in the bathroom sink than in his mouth. Choosing what to say about Pop was a daunting task. As you heard, he was an outstanding athlete. He served during World War II. He was an exceptional businessman. I mean, he was still turning a nice profit selling suckers to his family and friends just a couple years ago. And as everybody here who knows him and knew him knows, he was always a character, larger than life. He smoked big cigars. He drank big drinks. He drove big cars a while back. He laughed big, and it was really funny. He'd laugh until he cried. and he wore the biggest baseball caps. I'm Pop's oldest grandchild, and I know that each of his grandchildren would agree that Pop was a great-grandfather even before he received the official title as great-grandfather to Lane, Dylan, Nola, Zach, Luke, Brooklyn, and Robbie. Pop's other grandchildren, Jen, Craig, Jason, Sarah, and Leah, would probably share some similar memories of Pop, flirting with waitresses, napping in his chair, complaining about his back, saying, "Who could eat that much?" about serving sizes at every restaurant, taking us to lunch at the restaurant in the apartment in Florida, talking about how expensive everything is, but still sending us money and supporting us in everything that we do. There's no question that he was proud of each and every one of us. I think of many things over 50 years. Pretty lucky to have a grandparent when you're 50. Riding in the Caddy, listening to Andy Williams, Frank Sinatra, and Billy Joel on the 8-track. Going on a business trip with him to Indianapolis and eating chili at a truck stop. Pounding my fist on a ketchup packet at McDonald's and squirting ketchup all over his shirt. Our trip to Disney World with Randy and Stephanie. How generous he was, oftentimes to a fault, although he'd never agree with that. Our weekly phone calls. Winning big with him at the track a few years ago. Waiting for the phone calls from Mom to let me know that he's okay after surgeries. Pop after 1 glass of vodka, and especially Pop after 2 glasses of vodka. Our phone calls were legendary to me. The evolution of the questions from college through the stages of my work life to being married, starting a business, and having kids was tremendously minimal. I used to say that I could have tape recorded my answers and played them during our call while I did something else. Most recently, they always went like this. How are you? How's business? Are you making a living? How's Kim? How are the kids? And most of the answers were met with, that's nice. But he cared, and he was proud, but there was probably one of his stories or programs on TV. I thank him for some of the traits that I inherited from him, including a full head of hair, big ears, never sneezing less than 6 times, and a sweet tooth. Here's a few other amazing things about Pop. His favorite things to order at Joe's Stone Crab were fried chicken or the turkey burger. Whenever we watched the sporting event together, he always seemed to know who would win. I can remember watching John McEnroe play Yvonne Lendl in the finals of one of the majors. I wanted McEnroe to win, but he said he had no chance. He told me never to gamble on sports if I was going to pick who I wanted to win rather than who was clearly the better player or team, and Lendl won in straight sets. Probably nothing is more revealing than this. Right now, there are 2 caregivers in Florida, Adrienne and Christine, who are heartbroken about losing a man who barely spoke a word to either of them. Everybody loved him, and if they didn't, they were probably just jealous. Nobody loved him more than his daughter, my mom. For her entire life, I'm sure, but certainly for the past 30 years, she set the bar high for being the best daughter. We'd be here all day if I listed a fraction of the things that she has done. I talk more about this, but I inherited the crying thing from my mom, so I won't. I'm very proud of the relationship, really the friendship that my dad and Pop grew to have. That my dad came to feel the same way about him that we do is another testament to how special Pop was and how special my dad is. St. Helen. Let's face it, it's probably not easy to listen to all these nice things about him. We all know he wasn't perfect. And you put up with his nonsense every day for almost 30 years. But you know as well as us that it was a pretty unique and special brand of nonsense. And, as many of us know, you returned the favor pretty well yourself. Pop had the greatest friends, people we called, and some who we still call aunt and uncle, who were truly like family. And he had wonderful friends in Florida over the 50 years there, lots of people to brag to about his grandkids and great-grandkids. To all of you and the many who aren't with us any longer or weren't able to make it today, whether you are family by blood or not, you were his family. Thank you for helping to take care of him and putting up with him every day, year after year. All of us always felt better knowing that he was surrounded by such incredible people. It's been said in the past few days by a number of people that it's an end of an era. But it doesn't end, because the lessons and the legacy will live on through his family, his kids, grandkids, and hopefully be passed on by his great-grandkids. So, if I had a shot here To Charles Maxwell Zucker, Chucky, Papa, Speedy Chuck, the man who preached, be a leader, not a follower, who said driving with me is like sitting in your living room, a man who had to have surgery on his heart twice but still had the best heart in the world. We love you. So last thing for me, on your way out today, please take a Tootsie Pop. They'll be over here somewhere. If you really want to honor Pop, after your next meal, you'll unwrap it and enjoy it. Feel free to unbuckle your pants if you want to get the full Chucky Zucker experience. And Pop, I know you wouldn't like this, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to charge any of them for the suckers. They're on me.
I bet he would have loved that, Todd, for sure. Be a leader. Be a leader, not a follower. These were some of his words that he shared over and over again with his grandchildren who have carried on that tradition and shared it with their own kids. Be a leader, not a follower. And as family shared with me, when Chuck was there, the world was right. He took care of people. He brought them underneath his sukkah, underneath his dwelling, because he believed in some very deep way that we all belong to each other. We all have our tsuris. And he understood the other. Dale, I think you said that. He understood the other people, even if he didn't know them so well. He understood that the human condition is that we experience grief. We hit rocky times. Some of us are dealt better hands than others. And those who are less fortunate always deserve a second chance. He believed that his place was a home. Yes, he took family members in when they were in a tough spot, sharing a couple of bucks to get them going, like when he generously, even sitting at a restaurant, would overtip a server because he knew that that server was experiencing desperate times. Nothing more needed to be said. He made sure everyone knew he believed in them, that it was temporary, that life is fragile, and that tomorrow is another day. If he could give them a little nudge, a little push in the right direction, then he had done his job. He was a vessel of something greater than himself. He was trying to contribute to this world, as everybody does, move on, pass on the lessons to others. Chucky was born in 1923 to Sarah and Joseph Zucker, sibling to Arthur and Jerry, Leonard, Ruth, Edward, and Ronald. And we remember them all in loving memory, save for Ronnie. You're here, and we're so happy that you're here to honor your brother today. Chucky grew up in Glenville, graduated from its high school, was a star quarterback for its football team. He was an exceptional athlete, also excelling in basketball and softball. He was even elected into the Jewish Recreation Council's Softball Hall of Fame. Beat that. And in fact, Chuck continued his involvement in sports way into his 60s, playing racquetball and handball. And even though he was not a gambler, he loved to place a wager or two at the track as well, eventually investing in a thoroughbred breeding farm with like-minded friends. Investments, that was certainly a part of Chucky's life. That all said, Chucky was not a standout in the world of academics. Glenville was also the place where he got to know the principal very well. And yet the memories that endure, the ones that featured his lifelong friends from his childhood and school days. There are far too many to name, but there are some I will acknowledge on behalf of the family's request. in loving memory. Morton Sass and Mitch Sepkin, Bernie Beckerman, Irv and Marion Pollock, Laurie Skoke, Irv and Gloria Herzog, Shirley Appisdorf, Irv Zedman, Harold Sobel, Ruby Greenfield, Simon Taubman, and numerous other Runyon-esque characters. And he was fortunate still to have had in his life his adored friends who are living in and paying him tribute today, Betty Sass, Helen Skoke, and Alan Appisdorf. He had a special relationship with his cousin, Bob Bernstein, who wrote the following. Chuck was one of a kind, fun, generous, caring. He was my best friend. He treated everyone with respect, never knew a stranger. He brightened everyone's life. Chuck enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1945 before the Air Force was its own discrete entity. And he was stationed in India. And like so many of his fellow servicemen, Chuck married his high school sweetheart while on leave from the Army. Laura Manchin, may her memory be a blessing, was his childhood sweetheart. And knowing that his son was starting a family, his dad lent him a small amount of money to buy his first job lot. This little enterprise became Zucker's Outlet, a shop well known for high-end women's fashion. It's very hard to come across people today of a certain generation who do not remember Zucker's Outlet. Chucky would learn that purchasing quality fashions in bigger cities after season was a way to make them available to others in Cleveland at affordable prices. This proved how much Chuck was a savvy businessman, ahead of his time. He had a great mind for numbers, plus his appealing personality and smart salesman's ability to negotiate for closeout merchandise. That found him great success. He also engaged in personal investments, sharing a new and diversified enterprise with his friend Gary Grains. And Chuck's continued interest in growing his business interests led to the purchase of commercial and residential properties. All of his business dealings often happened, of course, as it did in the day, at the local delicatessen. And he soon came to be known as the guy who could give you good advice on money matters. Just visit him at the deli. And as dedicated as he was to business, it was all in the service of providing for family. Chuck and Laura welcomed Terry and Dale into the world, and of course, they remember him as an amazing dad. And even the kids' friends would hang out at the house, due in part to Chucky's magnetic personality. As you said, Todd, everything he did was big. He was kind, he was funny, and gave Terry and Dale's friends special attention and worldly advice acquired through experience and his street savvy. Of course, Chuck was so proud of Terry and Dale and all they accomplished in their lives. 50 years ago, Chucky and Laura were fortunate enough to meet a dream of theirs, owning a place in Florida where they could get away. It was there where they hosted their grandchildren and nieces and nephews. And when Laura became ill, their place in Florida was of great comfort. Sadly, Laura died far too young at age 63. And thankfully, Chuck was able to rely on many friends who comforted him through Laura's illness and death. Chucky learned that just as he was often the one to counsel and support others, his community would provide that very same comfort to him. And after Laura's death, Chuck was fortunate to find Helen, his partner of many, many years. They formed a special bond that found them traveling together and getting involved in philanthropy like City of Hope. And even though they lived in Florida, Chuck and Helen would spend most summers in Cleveland, where they got to see the grandchildren, eventually great-grandchildren, and attend their many events and activities. Helen, the family is forever grateful to you and your steadfast devotion to Chuck. So today, we sit under Chucky's sukkah, his sukkah of loving support. Today, his grandchildren, Todd, Jennifer, Craig, Jason, Sarah, Leah, are forever grateful for the role Chuck played in your lives. He quelled over your accomplishment. he was not only a grandfather, he saw himself as a secondary father figure, dispensing his advice and wisdom as if that was the expectation of every grandparent. Chuck was fortunate enough to know his great-grandchildren, Lane and Nola, and Dylan and Zachary and Luke and Brooklyn and Robbie. Lane, you remembered the candy drawer and sitting on his lap eating pretzels. And Nola, the memories of being in your old house with Rascal, your golden doodle, and Papa holding its paw in his hand. He did love dogs. He loved animals. He was a devoted uncle to many, with a special love for Richard and Terry Duchamp, as they were like his very own children. And we know, Dylan, Zachary, and Luke, how you have your own precious memories too. His greatest joy was to hold all of you on his lap. And you would sometimes pretend to play doctor. And you'd bring your doctor's kit and enthusiastically examine Chucky, Papa. But one of the most prominent memories, of course, is his regularly giving of sweets to all of you. He kept a Costco-sized bin near him and a drawer or cabinet filled with junk food that made Halloween trick-or-treating an everyday event for the little ones. I know many grandparents have candy drawers, but this was a different story. This was very large. This was insanely large. There was always something for you. Always something for you, and maybe you could give him $1. But not really. Just joking. And of course, the mantra, let's go to see Papa. Let's go to see Papa, meant that the kids wanted to be with Chuck and benefit from the amazing treats awaiting you. Ultimately, though, he made you all feel special, unique, loved, important. You knew that visiting Papa was a sweet treat in itself. And in recent years, I would ask Archie, see him at Temple. I'd ask Archie about Chucky, how he was doing, because I was aware of he and Terry's regular trips to check in on him. I've always admired Terry and Archie's devotion to Chuck. I appreciated how much Terry observed the fifth commandment, honoring one's parent. It was clear, Terry, that your life was greatly impacted by your dad, that each visit was a way of you giving back. Each visit was a way of you showing just how important he was to you in his life. How lucky he was to have you and Dale, loving children. And Archie, ever Terry's supportive partner, understood how much your help, Archie, and your succor provided to your wife. And while Archie and Chuck might have had their challenges earlier in their relationship, as was said, Chuck developed a trust and respect for his son-in-law, and it was mutual. It brought you both closer. What a beautiful tribute all of you have been, just by your actions, not even by your words, in honoring Chuck, Chucky, Charles, and Ronnie reminded me he was also Charlie. What an honor. What a blessing. You know, there's a tradition on Sukkot, doing a lot of things. Building the booth, holding these agricultural elements and shaking them all around. Lots of rituals involved. There's a ritual that involves inviting guests into your sukkah. And oftentimes, we invite the biblical Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah. We invite the great rabbis of old into our sukkah. We invite our guests. We're supposed to invite the stranger. We're supposed to invite those important to us into the sukkah. And today, it strikes me right here at Berkowitz-Kumin, this is one giant sukkah. And we are inviting Chuck into our sukkah. We are beckoning him in. We are telling him to sit down. We're probably serving him some sweets. And we're giving back to this man who invited us into his sukkah. We were always his guests. No matter where we stood in life, what we were going through, who we were, he always invited us into his life. He always provided us with shelter and support. He reminded us that even in the fragility, vulnerabilities of life, that there's always someone who's going to lend a hand, who's going to reach out, who's going to say it's going to be okay. There's always somebody who's thinking of you. Chucky was that guy. He was always thinking of you. And he was a personality to be contended with. And we are better to have known him. Zichrono livracha, may his memory forever be a blessing. And let us say, Amen. Let's pause for a moment as we consider Chuck's life and the gifts he brought to all of us. We invite you now to rise for the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת חיים בן יוסף ושרה, שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני ונחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן. El Malei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Charles M. Zucker, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. As we turn to the conclusion of our service, as you know, Chucky is survived by so many who love him. We mentioned as well all the spouses who are connected to Chucky's family. Maria and Tim and Kim, and Jason, and Sarah, and Rob, and Lauren, and Leah, and Jake, and all of amazing family members, spouses, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who honor him today. The family will be moving immediately following this service to Zion Memorial Cemetery, and following the interment, family will be holding Shiva at Archie and Terry's home, 3154 Creekside Drive in Pepper Pike, 31545 Creekside Drive, immediately following interment today until 8 p.m., Monday from 1 to 4, and then again from 6:30 to 8:30.